Hello and welcome to this quarterly webinar. My name is Pip Lawrence. I'm the Wellbeing Director here for Wellbeing People, and I'm delighted that you've decided to join us for this next half an hour, which is hopefully going to be a really insightful conversation around sleep tracking and biohacking. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jesper Dahl. Now, my formal introduction with Jesper is that he is a sports chiropractor. I have to tell you actually how long he's been doing chiropractic for. He's also been a performance director for some of the top PGA golfers. He actually worked with, I'm going to have to check his name because I'm not a golf fan, so sorry, Graham McDowell. He was the performance director for Graham McDowell when he was doing an awful lot better than he is now, unfortunately. And so that means that he basically worked with him on every element of his lifestyle habits, from his nutrition to his sleep, to his movement, to how he recovered from exercise. And what this means is that Jesper's worked at that top end with elite athletes to really optimize performance. And ultimately, when we view ourselves as this kind of like high functioning performance machine that we can tap into, well, then we can really start making some fine tuning. And yes, we might not be playing on the world's biggest stage of sport, but we do still need to show up and make sure that we're thriving in our own life. So that's what Jesper hopefully will be able to come in and do. Now, on a personal level, this is his informal one. I actually worked alongside Jesper back in my day when I was personal training, and I saw firsthand the incredible impact that he made on so many people's lives through just the wealth of knowledge that he has, including my own life as well. He treated me after I had a horrible bout of headaches. So without further ado, Jesper, are you there? Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Sorry, you froze my end, so I was not quite sure if it was time to come in or not. But yes, I was here all along.
Perfect stuff. Well, hopefully you heard the introduction, so we don't need to spend too much time on that, but I'm sure some of your story will come into play. You've obviously worked on, with these high performing sports individuals. And what I wanted to do is to really talk to you about a few elements. I want to start off by talking around sleep tracking, because I know many people wear these wearable devices and we want to know, do they actually work, and that side of things. Then I'd really like to move on to heart rate variability, which is something that I know me and you have had many discussions in the past on, before moving on to chronobiology. So if anyone does have any questions on these specific things, feel free to put them in the question and answer box now. But let's get started with sleep trackers. Jesper, are they worth it?
So I'll say, first of all, the three topics that you lined up for the presentation actually interlink really nicely. So I think we'll probably lend arguments from the different topics and the explanation of each. But sleep trackers do work. We experimented with it a lot with the various athletes that we worked with, and some of them really like to work with them, and some find them disruptive and confusing, and I think that's true of almost any data that we can get on our performance and well-being, is that it's a question of choosing some that appeal to you and that you can actually get some practical knowledge out of, because the paralysis by analysis is always just under the surface, and if you look at too many factors and too many aspects of each factor, you end up confusing yourself. The question about sleep tracker was one that was probably asked about at least 10-15 years ago, was, is it worth us doing it, and in which case, which ones? It turned out that the type of sleep tracker that most people rely on at the moment is watch-based. And that's actually how sleep tracking started. So it was a little separate thing that people were wearing on their wrists, but it was just like a watch. Now they've become fully integrated in things like Apple Watches and Garmin's and things like that. But then we went through a phase where the criticism of those type of trackers was that, what if my hand is completely still, but the rest of my body moves? And so there was an argument for having trackers.
Does that happen?
Well, I don't know, but people tried to make certainly a commercial argument for that, that we needed something that was more accurate.
Okay.
It remains that all the research is done on wrist-based because central trackers are uncomfortable to wear.
Yeah.
And
Central trackers as in being the ones that you wear literally like as a heart rate strap.
Yes, exactly. And Graham actually volunteered to become a test dummy for one of them, which was a whole vest.
Wow.
Exactly. And it measured a lot of very interesting factors. Most of them we couldn't make a lot of sense of. But it made things like, yes, movement, but also obviously heart rate, but also breathing rate and how that was affected and things like that. The thing is that although Graham was half man, half mattress and could sleep for England, Northern Ireland in this case, he still found that it was just too limiting to the routine of putting it on and faffing around with taking it off and things like that. So no, I would say that yes, they do work. Risk-based ones have got the credibility and is where the research is, but we've got to choose a bit carefully in what type of factors we look at.
And so in terms of, because when I was doing some research for today's webinar, I was reading up and I don't know whether this has changed like more recently as obviously technology evolves, but is it true that it almost calculates kind of what you're not doing rather than what you're doing? So it's kind of calculating like when you are disturbed rather than, so it's not really calculating your sleep, it's almost calculating how many times you're disturbed as like the main metric that it sort of uses.
Yeah, so it's a big part of it is the movement tracker,
Yeah.
and that of course is what Garmin uses for looking at your step rate and things like that when you're actually out running. But that's the same type of data that it uses for saying, well, how much do you move? But then combined with being able to take your blood, your heart rate, it then extrapolates a little bit about, okay, this is likely to be light sleep, deep sleep, and so forth.
Okay.
And I would actually recommend, and I'm sure we're going to come to this eventually, pick a factor that it gives you and ignore the others. So pick one that makes sense to you. So some of them will tell you how many times you moved. For some people, that's very relevant. For other people, it's really not that relevant. I would probably recommend that most people go to the deep sleep number and then just use that each day to compare how good was my sleep type of thing.
Yeah, nice. So just in case people aren't aware, obviously we go in and out of sleep cycles. So when Jesper was talking about deep sleep, we want to see that actually, are we getting down into that sort of stages 3 and 4 of sleep? That's where we're going to get our most restorative sleep. And if obviously the longer that we stay in those stages, the more likely it is that you're going to wake up feeling refreshed and energized and ready for the day, as opposed to, and I had a number of clients who used to do this, and give me a yes in the chat if this is you, falling asleep on the sofa, very common. That means that we're going into our first sleep cycle that then is going to get disrupted, because then we wake ourselves up, put ourselves off to bed, and the likelihood is that you won't then go down into that deep restorative sleep as if you'd just taken yourself off to bed before that actually happened. And I worked with a number of people that just by shifting that, we were able to get deeper quality of sleep, because really there's two things, isn't there, with sleep tracking, Jesper, that can be really helpful to understand, which is the quantity and the quality. Like we know from longevity studies that it needs to be more than, is it 6.5 hours, if my memory serves me correctly?
Yeah, so the golden rule is between 7 and 9 hours, and you're absolutely right. That's a nice quantity thing to count, because when did I turn the lights off and when did I allow the alarm clock to wake me is usually our measure of sleep. What the sleep trackers will add is the quality aspect, and for some people that will be noticeable when you change little habits, such as not falling asleep in front of the news, which I think is almost a protective mechanism for trying to protect you against the negative input that keeps coming at us from that screen. But no, it is about quality and quantity. If quantity is a problem, well, the problem with both of them is that if you identify that, for instance, you're not getting enough sleep or you're not getting enough good quality sleep, what do you do about it? Because that's where some of the frustration can come in when we start tracking these things, is that, yep, fine, I've now got a measure of it, but I pretty much knew that already. What do I now do? And that's if you then start doing something different, then the tracking becomes interesting, because you can see, okay, it may not just track the quantity or change the quantity, but also change the quality in the right direction as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, that point that you've just made, that it's like tracking is one element, but only track and then experiment, so that then you can see, you know, are those metrics changing, which is, I guess, exactly what you did with the athletes when you were working with them. It was all about experimenting with different things. Does this work? Does this not work? And then keep on moving like that way. I will come to questions at the end, by the way. I've seen that some people have popped them into the chat. Please do put them in the question and answer, just so that then I don't miss over them. So feel free to copy and paste those across. When it comes to sleep, one of the things that really opened my eyes was when I did get one of these watches, and I pretty consistently have around, you know, between that 7 and 9 hours. I often go to bed at 10, wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And one of the days I'd enjoyed maybe half a bottle of wine too much. And the next morning I looked at my little tracker. I'd had exactly the same amount of hours sleep, but it was completely different in terms of the quality score that it gave me. And that was when I started talking to you about heart rate variability. So can you explain to the audience just what heart rate variability is to start off with?
Yep. So it's one of those that when I started working with it, it was only in the professional athlete sphere. Yeah. And now it's become generally available. You can even measure it on your phone very easily. Coming back to the studies, that we've now got credibility in doing it with the phone's camera, which allows it to be done fairly easily. But heart rate variability is basically, if you have a heart rate, so your pulse of 60, you would assume that there would be a beat every second. Yeah, because a beat every second in a minute would make up 60 beats in a minute. And that makes perfect sense. However, there isn't. So in between each beat, there is an interval, and that changes all the time. So it's literally called the interbeat interval. If you have a lot of variability between that, so that means that some of those intervals between the beats are short and some of them are long, that's called a high heart rate variability. And that's desirable. That shows that your parasympathetic part of your nervous system is in control, which it certainly should be when you're sleeping, but it generally should be during the day as well. Your sympathetic, your fright, your flight, those type of responses should be occasionally recruited, but most of the time suppressed, and you know that what the world is doing around you. The heart rate variability is a good way of monitoring that.
So I'm going to just simplify this because for our audience, because that was a lot of big words in there. So, okay. So what I'm going to say is, I'm sure many of you are following along with that. But what Jesper's talking about there is our nervous system, and our nervous system has two sides. So it has our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, or freeze, you know, when we're in a survival situation. And then we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is also known as our rest and digest state. And what Jesper's saying is that on the whole, we should really be in our parasympathetic nervous system. Unfortunately, because of the modern life that we live, we're often bubbling somewhere in between in a state of chronic stress, where we're never really in a true survival situation, but we never really take our foot off of the accelerator long enough to go into that really restorative parasympathetic nervous system. And what heart rate variability does is it gives us a score where we can then start really tracking this. And actually, when I've worked with clients, Jesper, you probably have had a similar experience, that a lot of people would tell me I'm not stressed, because they put stress into this bucket of mental stress, as in, you know, oh, I don't have anxiety, or I don't have whatever it is, and they're just focusing on that and not focusing on the physiological stress, that actually, are your cells stressed? You know, are you dehydrated? Are you not getting sleep? Are you not getting movement? All of these sort of basic things that our body needs. And so it helps people, I find, when they get this score, to then start identifying, oh, okay, I had a really heavy exercise session, which is a great way to show people how this works, isn't it? Because then exercise causes stress in the body, which will then actually give you a lower heart rate variability the next day. Can you just explain why that happens, Jesper?
So thank you for paraphrasing my explanation so that it simplifies it. I'm normally pretty good at that, but you're much better. Yes, so to use a word that you might come across if you start Googling this afterwards, is that stress is what we call a hormetic response. So your body will go, what was that? I've got to adjust for this. If this ever happens again, how do I prepare myself better? So if you lift something heavy and keep doing it, your body will gradually get better and better at doing it. But what it will do is it will see that initial lifting session as a stress. And then as long as you allow yourself to recover from it, the body will adapt to that and get better at doing it next time. And that's the basis for us being able to cope with better with stress, either it being exercise induced or indeed life induced. So we really need those windows of consistent recovery in between to make sure that we're better prepared for the next episode of stress. And that's what the heart rate variability can be a really good measure of. It's not specific to any kind of stress. So you mentioned, are you stressed? And most people would probably say yes or no, but there are a lot of subconscious stresses that you may not be aware of. So your diet could be one, your sleep certainly can be one. Anything that causes inflammation in your body will definitely be reflected in your heart rate variability and the way that your body feels stress. And all of those are fine as long as you have those recovery instances in between. And we're back to, this is heart rate variability is useful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if people are starting to get interested in this and think, okay, well, how do I measure my own heart rate variability? Have you got any top tips or sort of beginner platforms or apps that you would recommend?
Yep. So there is quite a few out there, depending on what you'd like to do, because the frustration with HRV as just as a useful a tool it is, but it's non-specific. So what you probably would like to do is to monitor other things as well. And a number of apps out there will then ask you, well, how was your sleep last night? How hard did you train yesterday? Are you feeling sore anywhere? Those type of factors are nice. Yeah, and a number of them are doing that now, and there are even some that are completely free. So that's the nice thing about getting an initial introduction to there. There's a company called AMSA or something like that, and they've got 4 different apps available on both platforms, and they're called heart rates, HRV for. I've wrote it down to make sure, HRV for training, or HRV for biofeedback. And then they've got one that, as I said before, relies on the camera, because the other 2 rely on you having a like a polar strap or that type of similar Bluetooth base. Exactly. The free version that will do all of that, because most of those will charge you about a tenner to buy the app, and you may not be ready to do that yet. But there's a company that pretty much has formulated all the algorithms for working this out in the first place, and they're giving their software away for free, but they're not very well known. And they're called Cubios. So Kubios.
Oh, I'm going to type that in the chat. Say that again.
Kubios. And although it still relies on a heart rate strap, you can do most of the things that all the others do for £10 initial purchase, £30 a year, depending on what type of service you want. But it'll certainly be enough to get you introduced to the concept and say, well, is this useful to me?
Yeah, lovely. And I'm gonna bring a couple of questions up because they are coming in, so I don't want to skip past. So let me so one of the questions, just going back to sleep, someone put in, so when you say 7 to 9 hours of sleep recommended at night, should it be deep sleep? Great question on that one.
Yeah, really good question. And you can't control it. so don't let that be a frustration. No, deep sleep is actually fairly uncommon during your normal sleep cycle. So we're talking about these sleep cycles, and there's 4 or 5 in a typical night. And what you'd want to do is to, yes, get as much deep sleep as possible, but you also want to make sure that you go through the cycles. So, and that includes almost waking up again. And going through the dream phases, the REM phases and things like that are almost as important. But I just think that if you wanted to start tracking your sleep, deep sleep is a good one because it's a very simple number to keep track of.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. The next one, another great question. Do you find people develop sleep anxiety when dependent on tracking devices? I don't like them for that reason. And I'm with you, whoever put this in as well. I find that my intuition almost switches off and I start relying on this device rather than relying on myself. So yes, Bud, do you find that people develop a sleep anxiety when they use tracking devices?
It's certainly a possibility, and I think if you recognize yourself as possibly being a candidate for this paralysis by analysis scenario, then leave them well alone and go by your intuition. I think that if you are actively trying to change the quantity and the quality of your sleep, then it can be a helpful tool, but it's a very individual choice, and that's true for all these various tools that are available to us. Some will apply and appeal to you, and some you should leave well alone.
Absolutely. And that comes back to, what we always talk about our wellbeing people is that your wellbeing is unique, personal and subjective to you. So if you ever hear someone say you should do something, just double check in with yourself to see, actually, is that something that's going to benefit you? Absolutely experiment with it. But if it doesn't work, then just leave it exactly where you found it. So yeah, thank you. I'm going to just put one more question. Oh, sorry. Go on, Jesper.
And keep in mind that all these things are very individual. So you can't compare. You can't make it a competition. Oh, last night I got 1 hour and 15 minutes of deep sleep. That's not a competition with the next person. It's really comparative to how you did last week, and then see if you're actually going in the right direction. And that's true of heart rate variability as well. The number that you're given for heart rate variability is in milliseconds. It's quite a complicated algorithm, but it's a millisecond indication. And again, that's very dependent on who you are, how you train, how you were built, because the size of the left-hand side of your heart will influence it significantly, and you can't really change that a lot. How fit you are, as in cardiovascular fit. If you imagine that your resting heart rate is, you've got fewer beats in a minute, then there's more room for bigger variability between them. So there's a lot of different factors that you can't compare with someone else. So let it be your tool for you, nobody else.
Yeah, lovely. And one more, can you clarify, please? Do we want, almost going on what you're saying, do we want heart rate variability to be high or low? Just to clarify.
Pretty much. So you want heart variability to be high. So the higher it is, the better it is. But you will find, again, Google, it can be useful and dangerous, but you can Google and be told that, a heart rate variability between this number and this number is poor, and this number and this number is good, and this should be what you're aiming for. For us normal mortals, that is completely irrelevant. It really is a question of noticing where you start and see how different aspects of your life affects it. And yes, you want a general trend towards it improving, but it's more monitoring, what did I do yesterday that's now causing, or even the day before, that's now causing my heart variability to show up. And then you can learn from that and make it, make your journey smoother.
Definitely. And what I'll do is I'll post I think I've been doing it fairly consistently from November. And you'll see that there's a little upward trend in it. So I'll post that into the community so people can get a bit of a visual on how this is as well. I'll do that later today. So this question's kind of come into, I guess, the last kind of topic or area that I want to talk around, which is chronobiology. Now, the main reason I wanted to talk around this is because I wanted to say the word suprachiasmatic nucleus, because I think it makes me sound really intelligent. But I've been practicing all week to not stumble on that. But yes, but what is chronobiology and how could this help? I've got some questions in the chat saying, I only get 4 or 5 hours of broken sleep. How can I help to change this? Why might chronobiology be something that people need to pay attention to?
I think chronobiology is a great word as well. It's just got a nice
I'm going to get 2 points there.
Chronobiology is interesting. And so we probably most talk about it in the sense of how our cycles change in a day. So how our bodies may be slightly different wired during the evening than it is during the day, and certainly wired differently during the night, which is sometimes referred to as the circadian rhythm. But there are other cycles that may be influencing us, and that's when it starts getting interesting. So how does the daily cycle influence what's happening over longer time or even shorter time? I mean, I think, again, sleep is a great way of introducing this topic, because in order to sleep better, most people think, well, yes, and there's a very nicely nicely put together term of sleep hygiene, how you prepare yourself immediately before you go to sleep. So try and not have any caffeinated drinks after a certain time of day. And then gradually during the day, you prepare yourself more and more to go into sleep. So no blue lights, less distractions, don't watch the news, those type of common sense things. But really, one of the things that you can do that probably would give more value than anything is what you do when you get up. So when you just stop sleeping or struggle to sleep, if you make sure that you get daylight at that time. So
as in first thing in the morning.
Outside. Yes, first thing in the morning. Stick your head outside and make sure that daylight actually comes into your eye. Unfortunately, it doesn't work very well through windows.
Yeah.
What that will do is it will stimulate the balance between cortisol and melatonin, two hormones in your body that's really important. One is not necessarily better than the other, but they work in a opposite relationship. So when your cortisol is high, your melatonin is low, and vice versa. So what we want to do is, melatonin is sometimes called the sleep hormone. We want sleep hormone to rise as we go to bed. One way of making sure we do that is rise cortisol in the morning. And daylight is really good at doing that. So if we can get cortisol to be high in the morning, then automatically it will go low in the evening, and then melatonin will come in. That improves sleep. So that's the type of example of chronobiology, that when we start looking at cycles that influence each other.
And the suprachiasmatic nucleus, can you explain what that is, so that then people can understand that?
Nope.
Okay, well, I can take that on because I've been looking at it all week. But the interesting thing for me that I find is that intuitively, of humans, we understand that if, for instance, my lovely plant, that this one at the back that's not looking so healthy, if it doesn't get light and water, it looks like that, okay? It can survive, it can just about hang on, but it's not really doing very well. Whereas if a plant gets light and water, it then starts thriving. And we understand this intuitively, and yet we don't do it for ourselves to exactly that point. Have we hydrated today, and have we got outside to see the sun? Because it's this piece of information that our brain needs, isn't it, to then set everything else going well in the rest of the body.
Yeah. And the list goes on, but it's actually really basic things, and that's the beauty of well-being, is that the first 5 stages of well-being are actually really simple. Let's get outside in nature, get some light on the retinas in our eyes, because that starts changing hormonal balances. But so does movement. So the fact that you're outside and walking, it again sets us up for. So it's just getting very simple things that our body was built for, making sure that those are ticked off on a regular basis. So yeah.
And because the next one that really influences then sort of our master clock and sort of all our other clocks in our system, our circadian rhythm, is then obviously meal timing. So we've got, like, lights is probably one of the biggest ones, isn't it, that makes sure that we wake up, see light first thing in the morning. Obviously hydration is a big one, like you mentioned, movement, and then also the timing of our meals. There's a lot of research and studies coming out now around, actually, you know, should we be eating all the way through the night, you know, like we have done for the last decades, or actually allowing ourselves these 12-hour gaps as a minimum, sort of, so finish eating at 6 p.m. and don't start eating again till 6 a.m. or even pushing that to 8 and getting those 14 hours, obviously medication dependent and things like that. But that then starts having a positive impact on our chronobiology as well, doesn't it? So
the circadian rhythm is what happens every day. The infradian rhythms are the ones that happens even during the day, and we can influence them very significantly. So meal times is one way that we can program, both by what we're eating, but when we're eating. And time restricted eating can be very useful for some people. Now, if you're not struggling with any health issues, actually defined health issues, then time restricted eating is probably worth experimenting with. But if you've got things like you're struggling with your blood sugar and things like that, then I wouldn't recommend it.
No, absolutely.
But as a general rule is that what you eat and how you eat it will certainly influence these ways that various cycles are influenced as well. A good starting point, as you say, is to try and restrict your eating to within a 12-hour window. But we're to get the full benefit of controlling cortisol, controlling other inflammatory mechanisms in our body, it's probably advisable to try and aim for longer windows than that even.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't matter when you do it, funnily enough. We often see that time-restricted eating is, oh, don't eat breakfast. Well, if you wake up in the morning and you're struggling to get cortisol running through your body at all, not eating breakfast is certainly not going to help that. So you can make the window so that you eat breakfast, you eat lunch, and then you maybe stop eating after 3 or something like that. So,
which is
so
actually
there's
really
many
great.
ways of doing it.
Sorry to cut across, which is actually really great for shift workers, because it's often shift workers that, you know, fall out of the parameters of these advice, isn't it? And actually a lot of the studies are showing it doesn't matter what 12 hours you choose, as long as, you know, obviously there are some fluctuations, but the core benefits generally come through as long as you find that practice that works for you. So we have rapidly run out of time, Jesper. I don't know how that's gone past so quickly. I hope it was as enjoyable for everyone listening as it was for me listening. If we were to just summarize before we go into question and answers, just in case people needed to jump off, what are some of the core things to either one, experiment with, or well, let's start there. What are some of the core things that people you would kind of suggest to experiment with if they don't have good quality sleep at the moment? Where could someone start?
Get outside first thing in the morning. It sounds almost too simple, but for most people, it's not what you do during the night that you will feel the biggest difference. Yes, sleep hygiene is certainly important. Blue light is very abundant in the morning, which is why we want to get you out there. But it doesn't work in the evening for exactly that reason, that it stimulates cortisol. And we want to stimulate melatonin in the evening. So getting outside in the morning would be my overriding advice for people who struggle.
I love that. And I love that because it's so actionable. It's actually been my New Year's resolution, was because I've come back from maternity leave and I was like, oh, I don't want to be stuck in this room all day. I have a window here. I get to 12 o'clock and I just stare out the window like I need to get there. So I set myself a task to do a morning commute every single morning. I would go out for 10 minutes. And like Jesper says, it seems so simple, but it makes such a big difference to me. So I would just encourage people to experiment with it and then reflect and let us know in the community if it has worked for you as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll just in case people do need to jump off. I would love to get your feedback. Has that launched? I need to end that one second. There we go. That's launched now. So there's a poll up in front of you now. Please, once you've answered that poll, if you do need to jump off, thank you very much for coming on to today's call. If you don't need to jump off, we're going to stay behind and answer some questions. So I'm just going to start pulling some of these up now. So Lucy has asked, what's the best way of reducing heart rate at night? I wear my Fitbit in bed and mostly my heart rate is over my resting heart rate at night. Rather than lowering it as it should do. It seems a lot higher in the first place. Are there things before bed that I could do to improve this? Yes, but what are your thoughts on that? It's quite specific, but let's go for it.
No, great question. And I think it's this thing about sleep hygiene. There's nothing wrong. Let's start with the tracking part of it. There's nothing wrong with your heart rates when you get into bed being higher than your resting heart rate. Your resting heart rate is a slight cheat if you're wearing a Fitbit all day, is that it will take and calculate it from deep sleep included, and it will calculate it from the times that where it's lowest. And that's not necessarily a lasting night. But in order to prep yourself for bed, self-care is not selfish. So literally find out where you're comfortable at night. Go back to reading books instead of watching the news. That is such a great de-stressor, and try and not rely on reading from a screen. So because books are great in the sense that they don't emit any light, blue or otherwise, and I think that's often where that lies.
Definitely. Sorry, I'm trying to type answers as well, so then we can get through them. So the next one is, are SAD lamps, which is seasonal affective disorder lamps, any good for regulating cortisol and melatonin? What do you think to that one, Jesper?
That's exactly what they're aimed at. Is that the SAD, which stands for seasonal affective disorder, is exactly that. There's lack of daylight, so it's trying to produce light in the same spectrum as daylight, and therefore stimulating your cortisol production in the morning, and therefore getting that right balance with melatonin in the evening. There are alarm clocks that will wake you up with daylight, and I think they're a very good idea. Also because it's a lot better than a chime going off to start your day. But
I swear by these, by the way. I don't think I would get out of bed in the winter if it wasn't for my sunrise alarm clock.
Oh, excellent. I still say that real daylight, the real thing, and actually going for your morning commute, which I love the idea of, is the power version of that. But yes, I'm all for daylight.
And actually, there's some I don't think people realize that obviously light is measured in lux, and you only have to do a quick Google to see what is the difference between the lux, the light that we have inside. So I think now it's around about 300 lux. If I step outside, even on a cloudy day, it's something like 100,000. And if you think about that in terms of the different information that your retinas and that your skin is getting, it is massive, and is so, like
the width of the spectrum. So the width of the spectrum and the type of light that you're getting, right from the infrareds to the ultraviolets, will not be indoors. So it's making use of those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question: is there a recommended cutoff time for caffeine or blue light, or is that very individual?
It is very individual. Now that DNA testing is becoming more common and more affordable, to be frank, then you can find out your particular sensitivity to caffeine relatively easily. However, I think a good guideline is that unless you're particularly sensitive, don't drink caffeine after 3 o'clock. Yeah. Very individual. Blue light, not so much, because blue light is basically the morning light. So you know that very early in the morning it's red light, but then immediately the blue light comes in, and then red light comes in again towards dusk. And it's us trying to mimic that situation as much as possible if you're struggling with your sleep. So getting red light is really what you should be doing. Now, if you don't mind wearing funky looking glasses with yellow glasses in them, then you can get blue lights blocking glasses, and that may be your way of getting around that you have to work after 5 or those type of things. But generally the blue light is not individual. It really is the way the physiology works.
Yeah. And quick tip, only because obviously this is for me in the last year, I have a little salt lamp in my son's bedroom, which is like one of those little red lamps. Again, for the main reason for that is that then for some ridiculous reason, I went to go and buy kids' night lights. Most of them are blue. It's ridiculous. It's like, surely the science has moved on from that. So I've got a little Himalayan salt lamp, because at least it emits a red light, so then that's his night light. So if you have children, double check your night light's not a blue one, because that's just going to do the adverse effect.
The reason they're blue is that blue light has a high intensity in spite of low lux. But so that's the logic of why it's blue, but it's not logic from a physiological,
from a well-being point of view. Okay, right, I'm going to pop another question, and then I'll put another couple of questions. Any that we don't get to, we will put a little bit in the recap email if there's some major ones. I get this question a lot, actually. This is a great question from Brenda. Is Kindle blue light, or does it depend on how bright it is, or still better? So definitely better with a real book. I can answer that one. But yes, Bart, is a Kindle a blue light or not?
Kindle is a great marketing company. So they've now got these, I can't remember the name of them, but they say that it's a true light that comes off them and so forth. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know where they lie on the spectrum, but I would recommend that if Kindle is what you're relying on, then maybe get some blue light blockers just to be sure, because there's no doubt that it's still light coming off rather than you shining your bed lamp onto a page.
And on those blue light blockers, because these glasses are supposedly blue light glasses, is that clever marketing, or do you actually have to get the ones, like you said, where you look like a cyber hero?
So during the day, I think this too is, and if you hold your glasses out and they've got a slight yellow hue to them, then that's probably the blue light blocker that you're picking up through them. But obviously the ones that look like cyborgs are more intense and better at that. Yes. So if you struggle with sleep, maybe that's something that you can experiment with. I would say let's try and experiment with daylight in the morning first before you start making yourself look like an alien in the evening.
Superhero.
Each to their own.
I've got a couple that are really related to coffee, and I'm one of those people that's very sensitive to caffeine. So where Jesper's saying 3 p.m, if I have a coffee anything after, or anything really with caffeine in after 2, not even that, 12, probably noon, I notice that it affects my sleep. You can probably tell that I'm highly wired as it is. So if I add caffeine into my physiology, it just doesn't really work. It's like fire and fire. But a few people are saying very much addicted to coffee. However, I go to sleep. I get this a lot as well, even after having a coffee. No problem at all. Can you talk to what's the difference, even though you're sleeping? What's the big problem there, Jesper?
So there isn't necessarily one. That's the very individual bit, is that some people metabolize coffee so effectively that it actually has no influence at all. You can experiment if you are into trying sleep trackers. Try and experiment just for the heck of it, of saying, well, today I'm not going to have coffee, and then see if the deep sleep, which is my preferred measure for those type of things, if it changes.
Yeah. Although obviously do that carefully, because if you are very addicted to coffee, you're going to get an awful headache. So maybe wean yourself off a little bit.
Yeah. But this is again the individual experimentation, and have a crack and see if it makes a difference. Coffee is, let me say this with underlined, coffee is generally good for you. We went through 20 years of thinking that coffee totally dehydrated you and wore your adrenal glands out and raised your cholesterol and things like that. That's generally not the case. Now, there are certain scenarios where we want to address caffeine as a separate thing, but generally coffees and teas are good for you. So addiction can be an issue, and some people really rely on it heavily to get themselves going, or even keeping going. But generally, it's good for you. Then, interesting thing about this infradial relationships is that try to not have coffee the first 90 minutes after you get up.
Okay.
Because the way, again, there's another little cycle similar to the relationship between a cortisol and melatonin. There's another substance in your body called adenosine, and coffee works on the adenosine system. So your body is trying to work out its own adenosine system and resetting it the first 90 minutes after you get up. If you put coffee in there, you may be messing with that. And typically what you'll feel if you're doing that is that you get that afternoon lull that one of your social media postings referred to yesterday. And so if you do experience that, then experiment with not having coffee for the first 90, maybe even full 2 hours before you get up, which can be a stretch. But that may have a significant effect on that afternoon.
I love that experiment as well, because again, it's just, okay, don't have a coffee for 2 hours, which for some people, I know their jaws will be hitting the floor as we say this, but a great experiment to see then, do you feel differently? Right, we have absolutely run out of time. Thank you so much, Jesper, for joining us on this quarter's free webinar. I hope you have all found that helpful. I will keep an eye on the questions and I will try and answer them in the communities or in the recap email. I'll also send across all of the links to the apps that Jesper mentioned, that will all come across tomorrow. So thank you very much, everyone. I can see that 160 of you are still on today's call. So thank you very much for prioritizing this time. I really hope that these tips and tricks will help not only you, but your family and maybe your workplace as well. If you want any more information, obviously here at Wellbeing People, you can contact us. Jesper is also one of our Recalibrate Wellbeing coaches. So if you do have access inside our Recalibrate Wellbeing program, you can obviously reach out to him in there as well. And we will put his details and ways to connect with him as well. Jesper, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Amazing formats. Been very happy to be part of it, and I hopefully it was useful for people, and exactly mirror what you say. I'm be happy to hook up with people who need further advice.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jesper, and thank you everyone else for joining us. We'll put my teeth back in. We will be back for another free quarterly webinar. I think it's June, but we'll send the registration link out to that in the recap email, and you can contact us over at wellbeingpeople.com. Yeah, that was right. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope you get a very restful, peaceful night's sleep tonight. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.